Clint Eastwood had agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to appear on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. And from the moment he stepped into the studio, there was a kind of quiet electricity in the air, part awe, part confusion, part something unnameable that clung to the old wooden floorboards backstage and followed him onto the set like a shadow with a smirk. He was sharp as ever, with that gravelly voice and dry smirk that had long become a signature. And at first everything moved in that polite, TV-friendly rhythm. The scripted jokes, the crowd's choreographed laughter, the easy exchange of compliments between men who didn't particularly admire each other, but understood the machinery well enough not to jam it too early. Yet beneath the surface of this civility, there was tension. Not the kind you can see outright, but the kind that settles behind the eyes and waits. Clint answered Colbert's opening questions with clipped charm, talked about his latest project, something quiet and character-driven, and for a moment it seemed like the interview would pass like any other, controlled, polite, with that odd blend of earnestness and performance. But then Colbert leaned forward with that twinkle he reserves for moments when he thinks he's steering the ship toward something clever, and in an offhand, almost joking tone, he asked Clint if he could hold his thought for a second because, quote, "It's my show after all, and I just need to get this one line in." And it was meant to land like a harmless tease, the kind of host flex that plays well with the studio crowd. But it didn't land. Not with Clint, not with the audience, not with the mood that had begun to shift somewhere around the second or third canned laugh. And for a beat too long, there was silence. Clint looked at him, unmoving, unsmiling. And the pause grew uncomfortable enough that even the band stopped shuffling their instruments. And then Clint leaned back just slightly, like he was trying to understand if what he heard was real. And in that moment, it was clear that something had broken or maybe peeled away. Something about dignity or age or just the simple idea of respect. And though Clint didn't say anything right away, the look in his eyes said more than most monologues ever could. And while Colbert chuckled, trying to keep the energy light, trying to backpedal with another joke, something safe and disarming, Clint's posture didn't soften, his expression didn't change, and the air in the room shifted again, like a cold wind had slipped in through some unseen crack. And though the moment passed, technically, though the show continued, technically something had changed, undeniably. And you could feel it not in the words being said, but in the way they were heard, slightly off, a little brittle, like everyone was waiting for something else to happen, something larger. And though it didn't happen right then, it hung in the air like a loaded question. And if you stayed watching, which you should, because believe me, it does happen. It's just not what you expect, and it's worth it. Clint blinked once, twice, slow and deliberate, like a man trying to calculate whether he was being disrespected or simply misunderstood. But when he finally shifted in his seat and angled his body toward Colbert, there was no question left in the room. He was not amused, not confused, just angry, the kind of anger that builds quietly in the background for years and only needs a nudge to burst into something real. And in that low, steady drawl that once carried across dusty saloons and war-torn fields on screen, he said, "I'm your guest. What the hell gives you the right to talk to me like that?" And the audience let out that weird, uncomfortable laugh people use when they think maybe this is part of the show, part of the act. But it wasn't. And Clint wasn't smiling, wasn't performing. He was glaring now, shoulders tense, jaw locked, and the silence that followed cracked the shiny TV veneer wide open. And then, just as Colbert tried to recover with some offhand quip about how, "We're all just having fun," Clint raised his hand, not aggressively, just with weight, and said, "Don't do that. Don't try to laugh this off like I didn't hear what I heard." And for a second, there was a visible shift in Colbert's expression, a twitch of unease, a brief loss of control, like he hadn't planned for the interview to go this direction and didn't know how to steer it back. But Clint wasn't finished, not by a long shot, and what he said next didn't come out loud but sharp enough to cut through every eye in the room. "You want a show? I'll give you a damn show. I'll rip this mic off and walk out right now if that's what it takes to remind you what respect used to mean." And he reached for the mic clipped to his lapel like he meant it, fingers brushing the wire. audience gasping in that horrified, excited blur. The kind you get when something goes off script on live television and no one's quite sure if they should intervene or just watch it happen. But before he could pull it free, Colbert leaned forward again, this time with something a little colder in his voice, less amused, less diplomatic, and said, "Go ahead, Clint. Try leaving. I don't think you can." And that was the moment everything turned, because the way he said it wasn't a challenge, not quite, but not innocent either. Like he was pushing buttons for reasons only he understood, and Clint stood up. Just stood, slow, heavy, deliberate, and looked down at him, eyes narrowing not with fury, but something older, more disappointed, and without breaking eye contact, he said, "Your show is crap, plain and brutal." And it echoed not just through the studio, but through the control room and into the homes of every viewer tuned in. And then, without waiting for permission, applause, or a cue, he walked, just walked, past the desk, past the cameras, past the stunned crew, out of frame like a ghost exiting his own funeral, and the audience didn't know whether to clap or cry or sit still and pretend it hadn't happened. And Colbert, frozen in his chair for a beat too long, eventually turned back toward the camera with a forced grin and tried to salvage the moment with a joke about Eastwood being full of surprises. But the joke fell flat, the band didn't play, and for the rest of the episode, there was a quiet around the set that no amount of jokes or music could fully cover, because something had ruptured, something unscripted and raw and deeply human had clawed its way into the broadcast, and people could feel it. That rare moment when the image slips and the man underneath is just a man, hurt, tired, unwilling to be part of someone else's performance anymore. And what no one saw, what the cameras didn't catch, was that Clint didn't leave the building right away. He stood in the hall outside the studio, staring at a monitor showing Colbert trying to move on, jaw still tight, hands clenched at his sides, and a crew member approached to offer him water or a car or anything that might restore a sense of normalcy. But Clint just shook his head and said nothing, watching like he was trying to decide whether to turn back or keep walking. And the truth is, no one knew what he would do next, not even Clint himself, maybe. And that's where the real story begins. Not with the explosion, but with what lingers after. Because he does come back, eventually. And when he does, it's not what anyone expects. And you'll want to stay for that. Trust me, because the way this unfolds, it's not about ego or ratings or even hurt pride. It's about something deeper that most people wouldn't have guessed still lived inside a man like Clint Eastwood. And it's worth seeing, every second of it. For a while, no one really spoke. The show kept rolling technically, but the rhythm was gone. The jokes felt limp. Even Colbert's trademark smirk seemed slightly off, like a mask that had been dented just enough to reveal the discomfort behind it. And the audience, who moments earlier had been cheering and laughing, now sat strangely quiet, unsure whether they just witnessed a breakdown or some deep misunderstanding. Neither side knew how to undo, and backstage there was talk, nervous chatter among producers, assistants darting between corridors, studio crew checking monitors like maybe someone had imagined it all. But Clint Eastwood had left, not dramatically, not with a door slam or a final insult, but with that heavy, quiet certainty that something had snapped in him. And even if the audience didn't understand the full weight of it, they felt it. And as the taping limped toward its final segment, the energy never recovered until, with 15 minutes left, something shifted again, not loud or announced, but real and sudden. Clint came back, just walked in through the same door he had exited. No music cue, no cameras waiting, just him, standing there at the edge of the stage like a man who had decided to walk back into a burning room, not to save it, but to say something that still mattered. And when people noticed, first a gasp, then a shout, then an avalanche of cheers, it wasn't like the applause they gave for other guests. It was different, messier, more human, like the audience themselves weren't sure why they were clapping, but did it anyway, maybe out of relief or respect, or some strange mix of both. And Colbert, who had just begun a closing joke, stopped mid-sentence, eyes locked on Clint with a kind of cautious disbelief, like he wasn't sure whether this was going to be round two or some final reckoning. But then Clint walked over, Not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. And without a word, he opened his arms and hugged him, right there on stage, not forced, not performative, but real, firm, and maybe even a little shaky. And for a long, strange moment, neither said anything. The crowd on their feet now, shouting his name. Clint! 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 Like the studio had turned into a kind of stadium. And then Clint leaned in, still holding on to Colbert's shoulder, and said something only they could hear at first, and Colbert nodded quietly before turning to the audience and raising a hand for silence, which came quickly, almost reverently, and then Clint stepped forward again and spoke. Not into a mic, not with drama, just enough to be heard, and said, I don't know what came over me. I didn't mean to insult you, or your show, or anyone here. And his voice cracked just slightly, just enough to suggest the weight of age or memory or some personal shadow that had followed him in that night. I guess something just snapped in me, and I didn't catch it in time. And Colbert stepped closer. No jokes this time. No smile. Just listening. And Clint went on. You work hard and you do it your way, and I respect that. Maybe more than I said, and maybe more than I know how to say. And then, with that same dry smirk that had been missing earlier, he added, and hell, maybe I needed to be reminded that sometimes I don't have to fight every battle. And there it was. Laughter, not forced, not nervous, just honest relief. And Colbert, finally smiling for real, put a hand on Clint's back and said, You know what? You're still the most badass guest we've ever had. And the crowd roared again, the tension fully broken now. The strange weight of earlier moments dissolved into something almost tender. And the two of them stood there, not as combatants or host and guest, but as two men who had crossed a strange line and come back from it. And just before the show faded to credits, Clint looked at Colbert again and said, You're good at this. Better than I gave you credit for. Maybe the best. And Colbert just nodded. No punchline, no deflection. Just that shared understanding that whatever had happened on that stage tonight was more than television. And though the cameras didn't catch it, Clint stayed behind after the show, sitting quietly in Colbert's dressing room for a few more minutes, sipping water, staring at the floor, like he was still sorting through some part of himself that had been shaken loose in front of the world. And Colbert came in eventually, sat beside him without saying much, and the two of them just sat there. No cameras, no audience, just silence. And that's where we'll leave it, for now. Because what happened next, what Clint said off air, that's something else entirely, and it changes everything again, in a way no one saw coming. But that's for another time, and you'll want to hear it when it comes.